Welcome, everyone, once again to the Agroecology webinar series. My name is Evelyn Zuniga, and I am one of the communications officers for the Agroecology Partnership Project. This project officially started in January 2024, and it's funded under the Horizon Europe program. It currently unites the European Commission and 72 partners across 26 member states, associated countries, and third countries. The partnership wants to support the agriculture sector to meet the targets and challenges from climate change, biodiversity loss, food security and sovereignty, and the environment. It combines the resources of the Commission and the participating countries to fund research that generates knowledge and innovative technologies that closely aligns with its goals. This is the fourth and final webinar in the Agroecology Biodiversity series. And throughout this series, you have been exploring key practices, challenges, and innovations that can contribute to maintaining healthy and productive crops and resilient ecosystems. Just a housekeeping announcement, please feel free to type your questions in the Q&A and the chat section at any time, and I'm going to do my best to address as many as I can with the time that we have. Today, we are very fortunate to have Dr. Jane Stout, who is currently a professor of ecology and vice president for biodiversity and climate action at Trinity College Dublin. Just give me 1 second. I need to share my screen here. Perfect. Dr. Jane's research seeks to understand how land management practices, including agriculture and urbanization, affect ecological processes and the benefits of nature for humans. She works across disciplines with a broad range of stakeholders in public and private organizations to improve environmental policy and practice. She leads a team of researchers in plant-animal interaction research in the School of Natural Sciences in Trinity, and she's co-founder and chair of the board of the Irish Forum on National Capital and co-founder and deputy chair of the All Ireland Pollination Plan. She is currently the president of the Royal Entomological Society. And the title of her presentation today is RestPoll, Restoring Pollinator Habitats Across European Agricultural Landscapes based on Multi-Actor Participatory Approaches, which is the RestPoll European funded project. Jane, thank you very much for joining us today. We are very happy and very lucky to have you here with us. I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen and then you can start your presentation. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you so much. So hopefully you can see my screen now. Can you give me a thumbs up? Brilliant. Perfect. Great. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me. And thanks for inviting me to speak about RestPoll. As you mentioned, this is all about restoring habitats for pollinators across Europe. And the reason I have a picture in the middle there is Dr. Sarah Larragee, who's really been leading the work on this project on behalf of myself and for Trinity. And she just started a new job yesterday as the project manager for the All Ireland Pollinator Plan. So I'll be talking about the work, but really she's been the leader on this, and it's fantastic for the pollinator plan that she's moved to that role, but obviously I'm going to miss her very much at the end of RestPoll. So RestPoll then, it's all about restoring habitats for pollinators in agricultural landscapes across Europe. This is particularly relevant right now because it aligns obviously with Article 10 of the Nature Restoration Law that specifies that member states need to put in place measures to improve pollinator diversity and reverse pollinator decline by 2030, as well as to have a standardized approach to monitoring pollinators. So the RestPoll project is very directly addressing the needs of the Nature Restoration Law. Now, in Ireland, we're a little ahead in that we've had the All Ireland Pollinator Plan for the last 10 years. But the research that we do as part of RestPoll and as part of other research projects can help to underpin the guidance that's developed as part of the Pollinator Plan. And if any of you have seen the draft Nature Restoration Plan, which is out for public consultation at the moment, you'll see that the national approach to delivering Article 10 of the Nature Restoration Law is to implement the third phase of the Pollinator Plan. So this will be launched next month. We've had 2 phases of the Pollinator Plan so far. We're into phase 3. And the the plan for the next phase is to have these 10 modules, which has 6 core modules on farmland pollinators, on public land, on transport and utilities, communities, businesses and rare species, and then 4 cross-cutting modules of mapping, monitoring, research and awareness raising. So what the RestPoll research will contribute to is that evidence base to make sure that we are implementing restoration from a scientific evidence base to make sure that we're doing evidence-based action. The reason that pollinators have been called out in the nature restoration law, and they're one of the few taxonomic groups to actually be called out in the legislation, is because they're recognised to be both ecologically and economically important, but are also recognised to be in decline. And if we look at the European red lists, which are the official assessment of status and extinction risk for species, some of the main pollinating insect groups show that a significant proportion of species are at risk of extinction, and that many more are in decline. So, for example, for the European bees, we have about 1,900 species of wild bee in Europe, and the latest red list, which was published in 2025, showed that about 172 species are at risk of extinction. Now, this might not sound like that many, but the problem is it's about 100 more than 10 years ago. And even more worrying is that a further 33% of our wild bee species are in decline. About 14% of the species we don't know enough about and are data deficient. So we know that our bees, which are important pollinators, are in decline. And there's a similar picture for butterflies. There's about 500 species of butterflies across Europe, nearly 15% at risk of extinction. And for the hoverflies, which is another about 900 species, nearly 40% of hoverfly species at risk of extinction. So we know we've got a problem in these taxonomic groups that are important pollinators in Europe. If we come to the Irish situation, our red listing of bees occurred in 2006, which I now realise is 20 years ago. It revealed that 30% of our Irish bee species, so about 100 species of bee in Ireland, 30% at risk of extinction. So that's higher than the European estimate of a proportion of species, and that more than 50% of our species are in decline. So we've got a particular problem in terms of our bees here in Ireland. And the latest data from the National Biodiversity Data Centre from the Bumblebee Monitoring Scheme shows that even our common species are in decline. So common species of bumblebee that used to be widespread across the island of Ireland are showing year-on-year declines. We know what's driving this. There's no shortage of evidence to tell us that pollinator decline is driven by multiple pressures. So we have changes in land use, the simplification of landscapes, the removal of habitat features, the intensification of agriculture, the widespread use of cocktails of pesticides. We've got infectious diseases and parasites spread, particularly from managed pollinators, and climate change. And all of these cause poor nutrition. So the nutritional challenges from lack of suitable flowers to feed on, and because of all of these other drivers. So all of these drivers are interacting to contribute to reduced pollinator health. So individual health, population health, species, communities, and this overall pollinator decline. And as I say, the scientific evidence is there. We've done the research. So just on here are a few of the papers that I've contributed to in the last few years. The science is pretty clear. But the science can't solve this problem. Scientists can't reverse pollinator decline by themselves. We can identify the drivers of decline, and we can also help to provide the evidence base for restoration, but we can't do it on our own. So the RestPoll project was developed in response to these problems. And this is a multi-actor project. So that means it's not just researchers, it involves 31 different institutions across 16 countries, a lot of researchers across both the natural and the social sciences, but also including governments, industry, an NGO and a public body. There's the obligatory smiley kickoff meeting photograph from when the project started in late 2023, and it's a 4-year project, so we're into the last 15 to 18 months of the project at this stage. And it's an innovation action. So it aims to implement changes, not just do the research and produce scientific publications. The main objective, so the aims of RestPoll really is to understand how stakeholders can be enabled to reverse pollinator decline. And what we're doing is combining ecological, sociological, and economic research, and doing this using a living lab approach. So this means that the stakeholders are involved and consulted in the research process, and engaged in taking actions. And I'll talk more about our living labs in a moment. At the bottom left-hand corner of the screen there, you see all of our partners. In the middle at the bottom is a photo of one of the stakeholder workshops in a vineyard in southern Germany. And on the right-hand side is an infographic of potential options for farmers to benefit pollinators and other aspects of nature and people in agricultural landscapes. So the idea of RestPoll is to take this holistic approach to pollinator restoration. It's not just doing the science, and it's not just putting everything on the farmers to implement changes. So a bit more detail about the RestPoll approach, and apologies, these EU projects always have a great deal of work packages and lots of words, so I sort of try and break this down a bit. The RestPoll project has established it's interdisciplinary and an integrated approach, and it's established these case study areas to examine the effectiveness and the potential synergies between pollinator restoration measures. So multiple measures, either those that were already in place or have been recently established. And these could be measures at the field scale, on farm, at a landscape scale, national or even European scale. So looking at whether they provide the key complementary resources that pollinators need, like nesting habitats, forage resources across life stages and across seasons. So see what works well together for pollinators. And also looking at what the knock-on impacts of restoration measures are. So not just in terms of the pollinators, but in terms of co-benefits for people and for other aspects of nature. So quantifying the links between pollinators, plants, other elements of biodiversity, and seeing how that links to human well-being in agricultural areas. So we're looking at quantifying direct and indirect co-benefits of pollinator restoration for ecosystem services like crop production, but also for things like nutrition, health, culture, aesthetic values, and human well-being in general. In addition, we're looking at how we're looking at supporting European policies and market conditions for pollinator restoration. So, for example, investigating pollinator-friendly labelling for products. We're establishing living lab workshops and communities in the case study areas. So part of the this is part of the stakeholder co-design process. So these living labs are for participatory design, for demonstration, for learning, and for assessing both bottom-up, so management-driven, and top-down policy-driven restoration measures. And we're co-developing a database for open access resources. So this is the RestPoll toolbox, which will be available to users at whatever scale, at local, national, European levels. And the idea is the toolbox contains tools for management as well as monitoring to understand the success of restoration measures. And this is the bit that we're responsible for delivering at Trinity. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. And then finally, providing open access to information, including existing and newly generated data, traditional and expert knowledge, and the tools to enable researchers and stakeholders across relevant scales to compare the benefits of existing and upcoming initiatives for pollinator restoration. So I know that's a lot. In essence, it boils down to empowering society in general to restore habitats for pollinators across Europe. So it's a bit like the All-Ireland Pollinator Plan at a European scale. We need to find out what works. That gives us the evidence base. And then we need to make it easy for people to do what works. And this is where the toolbox comes in. And this is also where the stakeholder engagement is really important. So this is the living lab approach helps us to ground the research in reality. And I think too many research projects produce outcomes that aren't useful to the users on the ground. So the point of this project is to produce those tools, those outcomes, those actions that are actually usable by stakeholders on the ground, and stakeholders are in the broadest sense. So we have, excuse me, we have 17 case study areas in 14 European countries with multiple restoration measures consisting of existing agri-environmental schemes and novel prospective measures and schemes, things like payments for ecosystem services, restoration mediated pollination services, and all across agricultural landscapes to try and conserve biodiversity in general and wild pollinators in particular. And this figure shows in the green dots where the case study sites are. And excuse me, it also shows that sort of relationship between the local scale, the researchers, the farmers, and the policymakers in the various RestPoll work packages. And I think it's it's one of those schematics that looks great in a grant application, but I think probably sitting in the audience here, you're looking at that and it's a bit mind-blowing. But the point is, we've got this suite of case study sites, and we're involving stakeholders and trying to scale up from individual site level up to the policy level at the European level. So the Irish case study area was set up by Sarah, and she based this on the site network developed by a previous project led by the National Biodiversity Data Centre and managed by Sir Kavanagh, the Protecting Farmland Pollinators EIP project, which already started pollinator restoration measures across a network of sites in County Kildare, and had importantly built up a network of farming stakeholders. So we chose 10 farms that had been part of that project, 5 beef and 5 tillage, and we chose another 11 farms that hadn't previously been involved, and these are kind of our control farms. So we've got farms that had already implemented restoration measures, and then farms that hadn't been engaged with but any pollinator restoration previously. And we looked specifically at hedgerow management. So the RestPoll project across the rest of the case study sites wanted to look at specific implementations, and partners in Europe were looking at restoration measures like growing wildflower strips. And this isn't something that we advocate here in Ireland. So each of the case study areas implemented or designed their case study analysis based on what was appropriate for that case study area. So all of our sites are in or around County Kildare. We've beef and tillage farms. Each of the farms has been mapped. And 2 survey transects are set up, which you can probably just about see in pink on these maps here. The land use and habitats on the farms are all mapped and recorded in GIS, and all the farms are being scored according to the new Farmland Pollinator Scorecard, which gives a whole farm score for pollinator value of the farm. And then we're also mapping the surrounding landscape context of the farms up to 2.5 kilometres from the centre of the farm. And then pollinators have been surveyed on all of these farms. So we did a pilot in 2024, but then 2025, a complete survey from summer through to autumn, and now 2026, in the middle of or trying to get underway the field survey for this summer. The pink transects from the map on the previous slide were 150 metres each, and each of the transects are walked to record the abundance, the species and the behaviour of our pollinators, so that's hoverflies, bees and butterflies, along with floral coverage, so the flowers that are used, that are the floral resource, the food resource for those insects, and a full botanical survey as well. So we've got quite a lot of information on the ecosystems along these hedgerows. And this is a huge amount of work. So I just want to, at this stage, thank Sarah in particular for leading and coordinating all of this work. But we couldn't have done it without research assistants and helpers from other projects and visiting Erasmus students and volunteer students. So huge thanks to Moya, Sarah B, Katie, Claire, Anna Sonia, Cyrus, and PhD, and Dan, sorry, and PhD student Fern. Huge amount of work goes into collecting these data sets. So in terms of some very rough preliminary results from last year, we haven't done any statistical analysis yet, so please don't screenshot these and tell us that we've got to the end of this. What it looks like is that we're seeing, so this graph just shows the total number of individuals across those different insect groups on the farms that had already been implementing pollinator measures. So that's the protecting farm and pollinator, the PFP farms. Those are the ones that had been implementing pollinator measures, and the control farms, the non-PFP farms. We can see that there's looks like there's a few more pollinators on the farms that have implemented restoration measures, except for maybe the solitary bees. But what we'll do is we put these data together with data from this year. Insects are notoriously variable year to year, so we expect to see year-to-year variation, but we'll analyze it properly. And we also have all the floral data. So we have information on floral resource availability and what the insects are visiting. I mean, and this just really reinforces the importance of wildflowers and common agricultural weeds for pollinators. But there's still a lot of work to do to tease apart the actions that are benefiting different wild pollinator groups. So this is definitely a work in progress. And as part of our stakeholder engagement and the concept that these sites aren't just places to collect data, but are these living labs involving stakeholders, we've held annual stakeholder workshops, living lab workshops. So the first one was in September 2024 in Athy at Andrew Bergin's wonderful farm at Grattensbrook. And the attendees, the stakeholders who came to this workshop were researchers from our team and other teams, many of our farmers, but also representatives from agribusiness, from farm advisors, local and national government. And this is really important because what we're trying to do in RestPoll is this holistic approach across landscapes. That's really what we need to restore pollinators. And at this first workshop, we kind of put the context of RestPoll to the group. We talked about, building on the Protecting Farmland Pollinators project, talked about what we intended to do, and talked with the stakeholders about what their perceptions were of the challenges, the barriers to stakeholder restoration, what they need as stakeholders, what information, what tools they need, and what their priorities are. Then a year later, we held the second workshop at Willie Mulhall's organic beef farm in Derry Mullen, and he set up his cattle shed for us, which was transformed into this fantastic venue for a workshop. So thanks so much to Willie for hosting us. And what we did at this workshop was bring together several research projects which were looking at biodiversity on farmland, because we're really conscious of stakeholder fatigue with these sort of things. We wanted to make sure that the workshop was beneficial, given that everybody was freely giving up their time. So we wanted to bring together not just the RestPoll project, but other relevant projects and align what we were doing in terms of engagement with stakeholders. So we at this second workshop, we co-designed and piloted some surveys with stakeholders, and I'll give you a link to one of those surveys at the end of today. And these stakeholder workshops are a really important part of RestPoll, not just for that sort of information exchange, but really to build the relationships, to build the trust, and to build that communal sense of we're all working towards something together, that it's not just one sector of society's responsibility to restore pollinators, but it's something that we need to do across sectors. So the Living Labs approach gives us a way to do that. And then the final part of RestPoll that we're working on is the toolbox that I mentioned earlier. And the idea is that we create this resource repository to help stakeholders, so all stakeholders, in terms of pollinator restoration. And we've a range of tools. So, there's quite a lot of discussion at the beginning of what is a tool. It's basically pretty much anything that helps with pollinator restoration. So we've got lots of monitoring tools. We need to decide which ones will finally go into the toolbox. There's regional specific tools like our own pollinator plan guidance and all of the resources that are available through the pollinator plan. And then there's some technical research tools and models and software, which would probably be useful to maybe the research community, maybe to policymakers, possibly to industry, but probably not to farmers. And other tools, we've got information, resources, data sets. So there's an awful lot that constitutes a tool in this toolbox. And in terms of the criteria for inclusion, for including a tool in a toolbox, is that it should empower stakeholders to engage in restoration activities. So to engage in things that support restoration of wild pollinators, and also that they need to be accessible. So we're currently working on the toolbox. This is the workflow of the development of the toolbox. So we have tools identified by a previous project. We have tools that stakeholders currently use, those suggested from the consortium and those that are being developed. And they're being organized in the draft toolbox website being developed. So this is what we're looking towards over the next couple of months, is having the toolbox hosted on a standalone website to begin with, so that we can then go back to our stakeholders and go, okay, is this the kind of thing you were talking about? Is this going to be useful to you? What's missing? We are also looking at how we deliver these tools, so what the website looks like. And this is a mock-up of the draft website. So that, I mean, we need to engage with stakeholders to see if this is useful, if this is a way for them to actually find information. And we've Sarah came up with this lovely the 5 R's of the RestPoll toolbox. So the first R being read, so learn more about pollinators. The second being record, support and engage monitoring. The third being rethink, and this is really for organizations or individuals that consider pollinators in their supply chains, and it's not actually on the ground restoration or monitoring. It's what else can you do in the process of your organization. Then restore, obviously this is taking action on the ground, and the final R is rally, so spreading the word about the importance of pollinators and restoration. And there will also be supporting pages, and we will also be able to arrange the tools and tag them so that they're explorable, filterable, if that's a word, and this is work that's ongoing. And Sarah's replacement, who starts next month, will be responsible for bringing this to fruition over the coming year. So organizing the tools, developing the toolbox, engaging with our stakeholders in the living labs to see whether this is at all useful. What we don't want to do is produce another output that sits on a website and nobody uses. We want to produce something that's actually useful. So that's it really then. So the main 3 things in the RestPoll project that we're involved in then are the site network. So collecting the data, getting the evidence base, analysing what works, and seeing how we can effectively evaluate what works. The living labs, so working with our partners and our stakeholders, and then the toolbox to provide these tools for future restoration. So finally, before I finish, if you are a farmer or if you know a farmer, we want to hear from you. So this is Fernanda Azevedo, who's doing a PhD, and often we know what to do, but we don't understand the challenges and motivations from a farmer's perspective. So please, if you're a farmer or if you know a farmer, pass this link on, because we want to hear from the farmer's perspective. We want to know, are they interested? Do they want to do things? What are the challenges? What are the motivations? And this will help Fern to analyse from a behavioural point of view, and to provide some advice and guidance on how we implement pollinator restoration across farmland, across wider agri-environmental landscapes in Ireland. So I'll leave it there. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Jane. Yeah, I guess we can leave. Actually, you can leave the survey there,
yeah,
so maybe people will take more time to
I'll do
because
that.
I was trying, but yeah, it takes a little bit of time, so we can leave it there while we take the
There we
questions.
go. How's that?
Let's see, it's coming up. Perfect. We can leave it there. So yeah, now we have very, very interesting presentation and very relevant. Now, like we are seeing like over the years, the decline of pollinators in agricultural landscapes mainly, and it's something that it needs to be addressed. I feel like urgently. Now we have some questions here. Let's start. So people say, thank you, very, very interesting presentation. Two questions. How well do you understand the reason of declining pollinators, especially considering the trend over 50 years time? That's one question. And the second one is, and becoming very concrete, what would be the first thing necessary to improve or change the situation for the better?
Yeah, thank you. So in terms of understanding the trends of decline, I suppose the thing that's constrained our understanding looking back is the availability of data. So we have pretty good data for some parts of the world. We have okay data for Ireland, but there are other parts of the world where there's still huge, huge gaps in our knowledge. Europe's not bad, so we have okay data so that we can look at past trends. Looking forward, that's what the trying to understand how our actions are hopefully reversing the halting and reversing the decline of pollinators. That's why the nature restoration law has that second criteria that member states need to monitor. So as part of that, each of the member states will set up a national monitoring scheme, which is a sort of a stratified sampling, so a number of sampling sites in relation to the main land use of the country. So most of our monitoring sites in Ireland will be in agricultural land because most of our land is agricultural, whereas other countries like Sweden, most of their sites will be in forestry because most of their land area is forestry. So understanding patterns of decline is super important. It's also really, really hard because there's an awful lot of species. There's an awful lot of variability in space and time. So year to year variability according to weather, and then micro habitat variability up to landscape scale. So it's hard to monitor insects and get a good understanding of the trends. It's easier with common species or species that can be, well, easier. I mean, it's all relative. It's not easy. It's easier for common species or species that can be monitored using citizen science. And I think the bumblebee monitoring scheme and the butterfly monitoring scheme here in Republic of Ireland have been brilliant for engaging people, but also for getting a lot more information than we'd get from a national monitoring scheme. So that's the question about monitoring. Sorry, what was the second question? I've forgotten.
And what would be the first thing necessary to improve or change this
Oh,
situation for the decline of
yes.
pollinators?
Yeah, and there's not one single thing. That's the problem, is it's lots of things everywhere all the time. So it's, we talk in the pollinator plan, to try and make it simple, it's to provide food, shelter, and safety for pollinators. So they're losing habitat in landscapes, which means that there's less food, but it also means there's less opportunity for nesting. So they need both of those resources, but also safety. So protection from things that harm them, like chemicals, like pests and disease. So that food, shelter and safety, and we need all of those things. So it's no good providing loads of flowers for insects to feed from if there's nowhere for them to nest or they're still being harmed by pesticides, for example. But also we need diversity. And I suppose that's, if there's one thing we need, it's diversity, because all of those different species of bees and hoverflies and butterflies all have slightly different requirements, slightly different times of year, slightly different body sizes, slightly different tongue lengths. And so we need a diversity in the landscape. And I think that's, often we try and fix these things with a kind of a one size fits all solution because that's easy to implement. Everybody do the same thing. But actually what we need is lots of different actions so that we generate that diversity across landscapes.
Perfect. Yeah, I guess like sequential flowering of species, because in winter, if everything is dead, then yeah, it's how would you provide for the bee sequential flowering? I think it should be.
Yeah, and that's that's one of the problem with sort of mass flowering crops, is that they only flower for a very short period. So they might provide a boom of resources, but only for a short period. And if those crops are then treated with a pesticide, whether it's an insecticide or a herbicide at the end of the season, then that has implications for the insects that are feeding on them. But also a lot of most of our bee species nest in the soil. So soil health and soil quality affects our pollinators, and also many of the hoverflies have aquatic larvae, so water quality and so it's all connected. It's,
Yeah.
I think pollinators provide us as a good focal point for creating more healthy landscapes in general for nature and for people.
Okay. And so talking about species, we have a person asking, which pollinators are you addressing? Are you addressing tassel plant-based pollinators and their specific habitats?
Teasel plant-based
Teasel.
pollinators. Teasel plants, not specifically. I suppose we're looking at all wild pollinators. So we're I suppose we're not addressing the managed pollinators. So we're not looking at managed honeybees
Mhm.
or managed bumblebees or solitary bees, but the wild pollinators. So anything that's a pollinator. So bees are our main group of pollinators. Hoverflies are really important in the Irish context. Butterflies and moths, and then any other insect or any other animal that visits a flower and while it's there picks up and transfers pollen, acts as a pollinator. So the idea is that we're not focusing on specific pollinator species or specific taxa, but trying to provide the restoration measures across the landscape that will benefit all of them. And I think that comes back to this idea about diversity, is that we can't just implement measures that benefit a small group of bumblebees, for example. We need to implement measures that have benefits across a range of species.
Yeah, that makes sense. We have another question here. It says, what are the challenges and potential solutions to go beyond pollinator restoration on individual farms to coordinated actions across landscapes?
Yeah, and that's something that we're really keen on doing in RestPoll, is looking at those. So since there's focus on pollinators, there's an obligation from the member states to focus on pollinators under the restoration law. It's okay, what can we do for pollinators that also then benefits other species? So we're trying to look at if, we suggest particular measures for pollinator restoration. What are the knock-on impacts? What are the co-benefits for other elements of nature? So, for example, in Ireland, in our hedgerows, if we manage hedgerows less intensively and we manage them so that the hedgerows flower, so they provide resource for pollinators, it also provides then probably resources for birds in terms of the fruits that are produced from those flowers, but also the birds feed on the insects that feed on the flowers. And so those kind of knock-on benefits to other taxa are really important. And we're really just only kind of scraping the surface of that. But I think it's really important because, people will say, oh, geez, pollinators again, seriously, aren't we doing enough for them? What about everything else? It's like, well, actually, if we manage for pollinators, hopefully we are also then managing for wider biodiversity. But it's also important to identify if we're not. So if there are trade-offs. So if you manage for pollinators, are there unintended consequences or negative
Mm.
impacts on other taxonomic groups?
Okay, very interesting. Yes, we haven't okay. I gotta take the last one because we're moving. Okay, it says, how does the practice of regenerative agriculture tie in with and to pollinator conservation and in the with this project?
Yeah, it's all the same thing. Yeah, so regenerative agriculture is about creating those landscapes that are healthy for the production of food, for the soil, for the water, for the other elements of nature. So that's exactly what we're trying to do. It's regenerative agriculture by a different name. It's using
Mm.
pollinators as a flagship to create those regenerative agroecological landscapes.
All right. Okay, I have this question for me. Um, you were saying about the hoverflies that they nest in their larvae in water, and so I was thinking it is important for pollinators to have, let's say, ecological corridors that brings them through like to patches of forest, not just isolated in a plot of land and then there's nothing. Is it important for them to have like a
Yeah.
corridor to reach forest patches?
Absolutely, yeah, and
All right.
hedgerows are actually fantastic corridors as well as providing resources. But absolutely, linking up patches of natural habitat across the landscape is so important. And in Ireland, we're lucky in that we have lots and lots of hedgerows. The density of hedgerow networks in Ireland is fantastic, particularly when we compare to some of our colleagues in other member states across Europe. So connectivity in the landscape is really important, but also that's why we need this kind of holistic landscape level approach to restoration of pollinators, because it's not just the farms and the hedgerows being managed on the farms, it's the patches, as you say, patches of forest, it's the aquatic areas, the rivers, the ponds, it's the and then that joins up with the suburban and the urban areas, and what people are doing in their gardens and what people are doing in their businesses. So it's to think at that landscape scale and think about linking up actions. And actually, in the next pollinator plan, one of the modules there is around mapping, and the National Biodiversity Data Centre will have a new mapping system which allows individuals to visualize where their action for pollinators links up with neighboring and surrounding actions. So we can start to take that more holistic view so that we are working as a collective rather than it being, feeling like you're just doing some small individual measure that's not really going to make any difference on the large scale. So yeah, connectivity is super important.
Yeah, as you said, like yeah, it's an interaction, everything is connected, so it's not an isolated case. Um, so I have to close the webinar. There are other questions coming. I wish I could keep going, but I have to finish the webinar. Thank you very much, Jane, for
You're very
joining us
welcome.
today,
Thank you for
for
having
like
me.
giving us your perspective on how pollinators work and then showing us how this RestPoll project is helping, trying to help to restore the pollinators across Europe. I just want to say to everyone, thank you very much for joining the webinar today. And we're going to have a break over the summer and we'll be back in September. And we're going to change from the series that we have been doing over this time. I'm going to move to present the projects that the Agroecology Partnership is funding. So on September, I will be sending all of you the invite for the webinars. And I hope I'll see you in another opportunity. Thank you, James. Thank you, everyone. And I hope you enjoyed the webinar. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Bye.